So I showed this video to my daughter, and this is the one scene she opened her eyes and looked at me like, "What in the world, Dad?" Welcome to my first ever deep dive into one of my TikTok videos. I figured that if everyone else can make reaction videos, I can make them to my own stuff. So that's what this video is about. Usually when I make these, there's a lot more information that I have to leave out than I can include in the videos. So I'm just going to give myself the opportunity to kind of expand on some of the thoughts that I had making these videos, behind the videos, and little tidbits of information that I couldn't shoehorn into the short format that I usually make these things in. So as you can see, the way that this video came about was while I was driving back from vacation on fall break with my kids. We were driving an 8-hour drive from Florida back to Tennessee. And when have you ever had that moment when you get an idea in your head and you can't get it out of there? So that's what happened here. Like I had this. I've always thought about the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis and how to explain it to people in a way that makes sense. Well, the Boss Got People article that I had read earlier that day was that opportunity for me to come up with a way to make it make sense to people, because it doesn't make sense the first time you hear it. It didn't make sense to me. It's not going to make sense to you. But because everyone's automatically going to start thinking ETs when you say that there's an intelligence interacting with humanity. So it's a little bit of a different mindset than people are used to having. So that's what I was attempting with this video, is to make it make sense. So on the way back from Florida, I'm sitting there driving, and every now and then a thought pops into my head, and it combines and starts to have that snowball effect. And then all of a sudden I open my mouth up and start talking to my wife about it. And as you can imagine, that is not the type of a conversation that makes a lot of sense when someone dumps this on you in a car when you're exhausted driving back from vacation. So, but I was so excited to make this video because of the time that I had to actually sit down, clear my mind, drive, and just think about it. So I thought it turned out pretty good. I love that I got to dress up as an elongated skull person. So you can see I'm wearing one of my wife's knit hats, and that's actually a pair of pajama pants that are stuffed into it to give me that elongated look. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing it now, and I'll just stop it intermittently and kind of add a little bit to it. But the overarching goal of this video was to make something to explain to the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. And so it could be wrong, but it's something that we need to keep in mind.
I'm smarter than you. That could have been an accurate statement if it had come from this little-known race of humans that I'm about to introduce you.
So another real quick thing about that is I think this is just one of many races of humans that have lived that have had an ability of some sort. Maybe it's intelligence, maybe it's physical attributes and abilities that we don't possess. Maybe there's people that have been more connected to their environment than we currently are. I think that's a big problem that we have with ourselves, is we are not connected to our surroundings, to our environment, like our ancestors were. Like, it's just amazing that we're so confined to our four walls and our roof, our screens, but we don't interact with nature the way that we used to. And I think that we lost something when we lost that connection. So I think there's other races that have existed, not just these Boss Got people, that this video could be applicable to.
But first, let me introduce you to my like, share, and subscribe buttons.
Click on it if you haven't on my YouTube
It's ego check time. Because guess what? We may not be the most intelligent race of humans to have ever existed.
If you look at this chart, there's been a lot of humans, a lot of different types of humans that have existed. They've all filled a niche in their environment, and they've all gone extinct. And if this is the number of people, races that we found, there's some that we have missed, without a doubt. Like, we only found out about the Denisovan people because of a tooth, and I think it was 2 teeth that were found in a cave in France. That's the only reason that we know about the Denisovans. Think about that for a second. A race of humans existed, was successful for a long time, and the only thing left were 2 teeth. And we were able to determine that they were related to us, and that they were bigger than us, and they are in our DNA still to this day. If you're, I think it's of Asian descent, you have Denisovan DNA intertwined in your DNA. So I think that's an amazing fact. And who knows what else is out there that we haven't discovered because we haven't been looking for it. We didn't know to look for it.
According to a theory put forward by two neuroscientists in this 2009 book and summarized in this Discover article.
So this is the article that I actually covered. It's Gary Lynch and Richard Granger. It's from 2009. And I mean, that's 14 years ago, 13 years ago. And I hadn't heard about it until just a few weeks ago when someone posted about it. So why did this not get more publicity? Why does no one care when stuff like this comes up? It blows my mind. And I think it's significant that two neuroscientists have put this thing together, mainly because they should know what they're talking about when it comes to brain functionality and capabilities. I don't. I'm going to have to rely on them. There is a rebuttal later on from a gentleman that's a paleoarchaeologist. I don't know what he knows about brain functionality, but he makes some counterpoints to it. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But the thing that I have been pushed back on is after I launched this video is that it's not the size of the brain that matters. It's the neurons that are in it. And to me, it seems like the more space you have to house a brain, the more opportunity it is for you to have additional neurons in there. I would also think that it's important where the growth of the brain is, and that gets touched on a little bit later. But make sure you go check out this book as well as this article for yourself so you can decide. And if there's any neuroscientists watching this, I can't imagine there are, to be honest with you. But if there are, I'd like to hear your input on it.
A race of humans existed in South Africa that had an average IQ of about 150. These people have been named the Boskop people because fragments of a shocking...
Full disclosure, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. That's my Southern American way of saying that, so I could be wrong.
Large skull were discovered there in 1913, and it had an estimated cranial capacity that was 25% greater than ours.
That 25% increased capacity is something that seems to be consistent with the elongated skulls that you find around the world. And I kind of mentioned those a little bit later, but I don't get into that little tidbit of information. It's shocking to me it's as consistent as it is, and I just find that number pretty fascinating.
And this skull wasn't an aberration or hydrocephalus,
which it might be pronounced hydrocephalus. That doesn't sound right either. But anyway, that's what people commonly refer to as like waterhead people. It's a genetic abnormality. It's a problem. It's something that those people suffer with for the rest of their life, for their entire life. It's not a good thing. And I don't know if it's considered an illness or what it is, but it's an anomaly. It's not a race of people.
Because similar skulls were found in the area a few years later. And it also wasn't cranial deformation, because that brutal technique only affects the shape of the skull.
This is a point that one of my favorite, I don't know what to call him, Brian Forrester with Hidden Inca Tours. This is one of the points that he makes repetitively about the elongated skulls in Paracas, is that you can change the shape of a skull by cranial deformation, but you can't increase the capacity. There's no, I don't know any way to do it. The ones in Paracas have certain other features that eliminate them from being like you and I, that we it's just someone that put boards and ropes around their baby's head. So there's other aspects of it besides capacity that make it irregular.
Not the capacity. More on this later. But while the Boskop's people's brains were bigger than ours, their faces were smaller than ours, giving them a childlike, big-eyed appearance. For example, the modern man's face takes up about a third of the size of their cranium, but the Boskop people's faces only took up about a fifth of their cranium size.
And there's somewhere in here in the article that I didn't get to where they discuss the size of the eye cavities in the Boskop people, as well as, and that's why I refer to them as the big-eyed Boskop people, as well as like the Paracas skulls. Their eye sockets, their openings, are about 50% larger than ours. And that lets me go down multiple different avenues. Are they nocturnal, or more nocturnal than us? Did they operate at night? Did they live in areas where there is no light, and so they needed the additional size of the eye to be able to observe their surroundings? And when I say that, I'm referring to underground, because there have been in Turkey the civilization that built, I want to say it could house 30,000 people in underground tunnels that wasn't discovered until a guy was renovating his house, adding a basement, knocked a hole in the wall, and found this gigantic complex of caverns and tunnels and different locations. The name of the places eludes me at the moment, but it's amazing. And so maybe there were civilizations that lived underground, and they adapted to their environment over the millennia. Who knows?
And while the combination of a large cranium and an immature face would look odd to modern eyes, it wouldn't look entirely unfamiliar, because similar type faces have been staring at us from book covers, TV shows, movies that depict alien greys.
So we've all seen the images that media puts out as far as the greys. That seems to be a very consistent reported sighting. There's, of course, a wide array of different entities that have been reported or discussed during encounters. These, I'm not going to say these are the same thing. Like that, there's nothing that makes me think that a gray alien extraterrestrial would be the Boscott people. I'm just saying in general, like, there is a consistency in the sightings and the encounters with this particular shape. And something else that's discussed by Michael P. Masters in his extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is basically that the ETs that we're observing today are us, humanity, from the future, coming back to do observation, to adjust course passively for us. But it's another thing, like if we continue on the evolutionary track that we're headed down as humanity, our eyes are going to get bigger, our brains are going to get bigger, our faces are going to get smaller. This is what humanity would end up transitioning into if we continue down the evolutionary path that we're taking. I say that, but then I also think that Wall-E's representation of humanity in the future might be the more accurate description of it, where everybody just sits on hover rounds and eats and eats and eats, and we get robots to do everything for us. That one's right on the nose, in my opinion.
More on this later as well. But when it comes to brains, does size matter? According to the authors of this book, yeah, it does.
So I showed this video to my daughter, and this is the one scene she opened her eyes and looked at me like, what in the world, Dad? I thought it was funny. I hope you guys liked it.
But this is obviously a controversial theory. And this article does contain a link to a rebuttal by John Hawkes, who's a paleoanthropologist, and you can go check it out for yourself.
So a paleoanthropologist, that doesn't sound like someone that is medically trained on how the brain functions. So I think he's just taken a look at it from the perspective of an anthropologist. Like, what would their civilization be like? I don't know. I can't say I read the entire thing. I'm going to default to the work of neurosurgeons. Why can't I come up with the word? The brain dudes that wrote the article in the book itself. Like, I got to think that they know more about brain functionality and the changes in size and the impacts of that than a paleoanthropologist.
But the neuroscientists that propose this theory
that's what it is,
state that expanding the size of the brain changes the internal proportions in a very predictable manner. For instance, when comparing the human brain to the ape brain, most of the fourfold growth occurs in the cortex. And even within the cortex, the areas that grow the most by far are the association areas, not motor skills or coordination.
So when I said that, just to basically state that if you don't get better at basic functionality of your body and things like that as your brain increases. That's kind of like the root to keep the base of your brain that keeps you alive, is the ability to do those things. It's almost like you get a base model vehicle, and that's the minimum brain you need. any accessory that you add onto it is going to require additional brain capacity. Like if you wanted to get the chrome wheel package on your car, the equivalent would be the ability to think existentially in your brain, and you would require additional size to do that, and it would predominantly be in the cortex.
Now, when we compare the boss cop brain to the human brain, the association zones are even more disproportionately expanded, which results in a staggering 53% increase in the prefrontal cortex, which just so happens to be a part of our brain that's closely linked to our highest cognitive functions. This could have enabled the boss cops to be better observers of their environment and make them better at interpreting and predicting outcomes of external events.
So this is where I think the importance of a very important point to make is if they had the ability to better understand cause and effect of their actions, it would result in them taking a different path. Because we as humanity, in my opinion, are kind of like, we're just going to charge on forward and we're going to just populate, and we want more and we want more and we want more. But if you look at certain civilizations that have existed throughout humanity, the Native Americans in particular that I'm familiar with, they are more inclined to think about the fitting into their environment. They don't have excess. We as Western civilization strive for excess, strive for grandiose living. They lived sustainably. And so that's one of the things that I think about when this came up, is if they were smarter than us, would they expand across the globe like we would? Or would they say, hey, we just want to get to the point where we're able to survive, and then we can use our efforts to just to blend into the environment, be part of the environment, not continually try to grow and grow and grow, because the outcome of that overall growth is going to be a net negative for themselves, for the planet. And as we see right now with the way that I consider humanity kind of like a cancer in regards to the earth. We've really scarred it real bad, and it's hard to get to back that off. So I feel like we are kind of like a cancer when it comes to an organism when we look at it from the earth's perspective. So would these Boscott people, or would any civilization that was smarter than us, have the thought process of, I don't want to ruin my environment, which is another theme that comes up in the abduction scenarios, where they are concerned about the environment. They don't want us to damage the environment. These people wouldn't want to damage their own environment because they knew it would affect them in the long run. So I think this is a statement that you have to think about to really understand. Like if you knew the consequences of your action would lead to something bad, you would change what you did up front. If they had the ability, the foresight to see that millennia down the road where we can't, we choose not to, would we choose a different path? And I think if we were smart, we would.
These abilities would have made him a shoe-in for positions of leadership if our ancients had intermingled with them, as well as potentially leading to the Boscops being revered to the point of worship by our ancestors, which could have led to modern man emulating the physical characteristics of the Boscops.
So this is where I think that the people that were leaders a long time ago, they had fanboys back then. They had people that looked up to them. Maybe if you were the smartest, there's a phrase that's always come to mind: in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is the king. So if you have a distinct advantage over everyone, people will naturally make you a leader. Basically, they'll ask you, they'll come to you, they'll look towards you to figure out what they should be doing. So if these people have IQs far above ours, if they integrate it into our society, they would naturally rise to the top. And then people would basically look at them and emulate them and want to, get a piece of it. Like we dress like the fashion today is basically based on the celebrities that we see in public. They set the standard for how the rest of us physically dress, in a lot of cases, not all cases. So if they had elongated skulls or larger heads, the civilization that looked up to these people would, that were led by these people, would want to start to get a little bit of that celebrity, do something to make themselves look like that. And the parents, if they, I mean, I don't know what it would take for me to want to do something to my kid's head when they were an infant, but if that's where I think these people were just revered by the populace at the time, and then they were willing to go to the extremes of misshaping their children's head to replicate those people, because that practice had to come from somewhere. Not someone didn't just wake up one day and say, let's strap some boards and wrap some string around this kid, my kid, so he can scream in pain over and over again as I tighten these bands up over the course of the next few years. No one's going to do that. So there was a reason for it. There was a payoff, and it was probably social status is my interpretation of what was going on.
So could they have been the inspiration that led mothers and fathers to disform their babies' heads in an attempt to gain social status? Could the Boskops be the inspiration that led to the design of the headgear that the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom wore?
Yet again, there's two things. Maybe they said, all right, we don't want to misshape our kids' heads, but we want to, the gods of old is who they were trying to replicate. Maybe they said, if this is what they look like, I can just put this hat on and it'll make me look like them, and it'll make me a fit for, like, if I'm going into a business meeting, I'm going to wear a suit, you know? I'm not going to come in jogging pants. So maybe these people wanted to be revered and respected like the higher intelligence people that used to lead the civilizations a long time ago. Maybe that's what they were trying to replicate with headgear.
Could it be that the bloodline of the Egyptian pharaohs contained DNA from the Boskop people? Take a look at this image of the pharaoh Akhenaten and his family.
So if you know anything about Egyptian history, you know Akhenaten was referred to as the heretic king. And the reason he was is because he was not a fan of the multiple gods. And he also was requesting that he was depicted as he was. I think he said, depict me as I am, instead of being the perfect specimen, which the pharaohs in front of him were basically like, give me some six-pack abs, make sure my jawline is real square. If you look at any of the carvings of him, he's not an aesthetically pleasing human being. And it's depicted that he had a large head as well. And as you can see in these pictures, so did his kids. And doesn't look like they're headboarded, but I can't sit here and tell you that's what I think about this particular family, but it looks like it from these carvings.
Note the unusual size and shape of their heads. And just last month, more elongated skulls were discovered in Iran. They were buried apart from the rest of the population, which is an indication that they might have been the ruling class at that time. And these elongated skulls found in...
This one is from, that was found earlier, not just a month ago. So this one was found, but look at the size of that thing. I mean, it is an addition to, I can see the shape of the skull here that would look like ours. And then there's an addition to it. It's just ridiculously large. So what could they do with that additional volume that we can't do?
In Iran bear a strong resemblance to those that are in Paracas, Peru.
There's that 25% larger number that I was telling you about. I didn't get to mention it here or in the video, but 25% is a game changer.
Which, by the way, had red hair.
That's another thing that I find really striking about the elongated skull people in South America in particular. No one had red hair. None of the indigenous people had red hair back then. So where did these people come from? They came from I want to say the Black Sea area is the DNA that results that I've seen point to that area, that location. So it's shocking to me that they're redheaded and lived in a world of black-headed people. And once again, that would have made them stand out from the crowd. They had this huge head. If they were smart, there's without a shadow of a doubt that in my mind that they would be hoisted into a position of prominence, of importance. People would look to them and be like, those guys are elites. Those guys are heads and shoulders above our populace. We need to revere them. We need to listen to what they have to say. And I think that those people were escaping something. The red-headed Paracas people were escaping something. And they went over to South America to get a fresh start, and they wanted to assimilate into the population. And you can see when you look at the elongated skulls, they're huge in the beginning, and then they start to get smaller as they, in my understanding, start to interbreed with the local population, which is a very common occurrence in humanity. We have Neanderthal blood in us. We have Denisovan blood in us. These people would have probably bred or interbred with the local population and started to look more like them as time went on. But I also wonder if the size of the brain reflected negatively on the physical abilities of the body that they had. As in, were they weaklings, but really smart?
And just take a look at this guy.
That one's got a name, and I'm forgetting what it is right now, but that's the one that everybody looks at and just scratches their head. It's such a look at the eye. Look at the size of the eye sockets on that guy. Those are bigger than yours.
Are these the last of a dying breed of intellectually superior humans that lived in a pre-Diluvian world, but that were not able to compete on a level playing field with our more aggressive and savage ancestors?
So this is where I say, not brains don't always win. Look at any high school. Look at any middle school. The smart kids aren't the ones that are dominating it. It's the people that are willing to get in trouble, more or less. You know, like there's exceptions to the rule, of course, but the people that run the show are those that are willing to get in trouble, and it brings friends, it brings social status to do that stuff in our civilization. We don't hold up our most intelligent people as celebrities in this country. We don't. So when I think of the interaction that the Boscop people or anyone of super high intelligence that might have a weaker body than us, when I think about them meeting up with our ancestors who were designed to kill, I mean, we use our brains for as soon as we find a new technology, the first thing we say is, how can we weaponize it? Maybe they didn't think that way. Maybe they thought, oh, how can we harness this for the good, the greater good? We're looking to kill people. I mean, that's what it boils down to. So when I think about the interactions, it doesn't, just because they're smarter than us doesn't mean that they would be able to compete with us at the same level. And with the size of their heads, I would think that the birth rate is definitely affected. The infant mortality rate would be affected, especially in this time frame. So when I talk about the antediluvian world, there was a catastrophe that occurred about 11,500 years ago that basically reset the clock of civilization for everyone. That puts us on an even playing field across the globe with everyone. And if our more aggressive forefathers came in contact with this passive, thoughtful, intelligent group of people, they would have been able to take advantage of them. And these intelligent people would probably be like, we need to avoid contact with them. We need to go hide. And maybe that's when they decided to go underground, and that's when their eyes started to adapt to their environment, and they started to rely on stealth as their survival technique. UFOs are referred to as being evasive from the Twining document back in the 40s. They're evasive today. So maybe that's one of the catalysts that has started this characteristic trait of the UFO phenomenon in being elusive, is that they just want to avoid us, and we could populate the earth faster. We could overwhelm them with numbers and aggression compared to them using and relying on intelligence to survive.
After the Younger Dryas catastrophe.
The Younger Dryas, if you don't know about that, man, it's one of the most amazing stories never told in mainstream media. Something happened. I think it was an asteroid or a comet hit the Earth and melted so much water or so much ice that was on the northern continental shelf that it just flooded the oceans. Sea levels rose 400 feet in this time. And of course, if you're a civilization back then, you're building on the seashores. Those are now underwater. So the civilizations that we don't know about are underwater, and that's why we don't know about them. So who knows how many races of people that we would be able to find if we could excavate the burial sites that are now submerged. So it's just mind-blowing that this occurred, and we're just now in the last 20, 30 years really starting to come to grips with it, and it's starting to be accepted more and more and more than it was when it was laughed off by people of the past that knew what history was and refused to adapt their paradigms to the new information that was coming forward. Just like people refuse to think that we're not the center of the universe, that we're not the center of the galaxy, that we're not the smartest, that we're not the best, that this universe isn't built just for us, that we share it. People are struggling to come to grips with that.
That occurred 12,000 years ago. And if you don't know anything about that catastrophe, you need to check out some Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock videos.
I actually got to meet Randall
So did
Carlson
the last vestiges of the elongated skull people.
I was so nervous when I met him. Like at first I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to have an interesting conversation with him. And I started talking, and oh man, I started getting so nervous just because I've watched so many of his podcasts. It made me I started shaking, I'll be honest. Like I was trying to seem calm, cool, and collected and have this interesting conversation, but I was just fanboying out. It was embarrassing.
People that survived the catastrophe have to hide from us and use stealth to avoid contact with us. In the event contact was made, would they lie to us and tell us that they were from the heavens so that we wouldn't look for them on?
So this is something that Jacques Vallée has brought up. Hold on one second. I'm making a recording.
Did I just walk in on it?
Yeah.
Oh, and then?
Get back to it. So this is something that's brought up by Jacques Vallée in his book, Passport to Magonia. If you look at the cover of it, it's got a picture of an alien with holding a mask up over his, no, it's an alien mask over something that's over the devil, that's over something. So it seems like there is a deception narrative associated with whatever this non-human intelligence is that's interacting with humanity. As well, this is something that Mac Tonnies brings up in his crypto-terrestrial book that I bring up later, where he states that if they wanted to hide from us, the best way that they could is to redirect our attention and say, look up there instead of looking down here where we are. So it would throw us off their track. So I think that's something that needs to be considered when you look at the phenomena. Like, why are we looking up when maybe we could be looking down or into our oceans?
Earth, in secluded places like our mountains.
And that's actually Mount Kailash. It's in India, and it's got a whole lot of lore associated with it. It's basically the Indians believe that's where their gods lived, which their gods are blue and from outer space and flew vimanas that are anti-gravity vehicles. So I had to put that in there.
It's our ice-covered land.
And that, of course, is Antarctica, where there's been a lot of rumors of things going on down there that shouldn't be going on down there. So I had to add that one in there. And the deep oceans, of course, is just something that is fascinating to me. We know so little about it. There's so much space. I've posted a picture or a graph of a scene of the Earth where it was predominantly water. And somebody said, well, this is fake because there's no land, which in my mind says this guy doesn't know that the Earth is 70% water, 30% land. So when you think about that and you think about the amount of sightings and encounters that are taking place off the Catalina Islands in California, off the coast of California, which includes the Nimitz encounter from 2004, there's something about the water. What it is, I don't know. No one knows. That's the most hush-hush thing that is going to be talked about by the Congress. They don't want to bring up anything associated with the USO phenomenon, mainly because of the technology that we are using to spy on our allies and enemies in the oceans, and we don't want that to be brought to the surface. But anytime they bring up USOs or anything underwater, the Department of Defense is going to nip that in the bud and say we need to talk about that outside of public settings.
Have they advanced technologically in secret alongside of us for millennia? And are our sensors just now getting advanced enough to where we can finally start to...
So this is an important note to be made because there's technologies the Aegis radar system that was used in 2004 on the Nimitz was a new system. So they'd been operating in that area for a long time and hadn't picked anything up. The thought process is that now that they've upgraded the radar systems they have, they're able to see things that they weren't able to see before. And that's where I think it's called, what's it called? Not satellite interference. I don't know, the word's eluding me at this time, but basically they can jam radar, they can sensor disassembly, it might be what it's called, but they can basically mask themselves from our technologies up until we're getting these new high-tech, super awesome radar systems like the Aegis system. So maybe we are just now starting to pick them up with our sensors, whereas we were only able to rely on our eyes in the past.
Detect them. Could these people be the brains behind the UFO phenomenon?
And when I say these people, I don't mean the Boscott people specifically, but just any race of humanity that could have existed before the Younger Dryas that was reset alongside of us and had to go in hiding, that were able to think on a different level than we were, that were able to solve problems in a different way that we were.
Have you ever heard of the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis?
Great book, amazing mind, wrote it. Mac Tonnies was the torchbearer for this hypothesis, and this is the hypothesis that keeps coming back up to the surface when you talk to other people that are in the field. George Knapp is the one that kind of struck me, like when he brought it up as another possible explanation for what we're seeing right now. When he said that, my ears perked up and I paid attention because I had just finished reading this book. So it was confirmed there. When Hal Puthoff talks about ultra-terrestrials in his paper that he just released, he's talking about crypto-terrestrials, basically. A lot of that paper is about cryptos. So it's an interesting read. It's a short read, and it is a brain scrambler. So I would highly recommend that book.
Hypothesis. Think about it this way. If these guys existed today, and you had a classroom of 35 big-headed, baby-faced Biscop kids, 5 or 6 of them would have IQs on level with the highest IQs ever recorded in human history.
So that's crazy when you think about it that way. Our greatest minds were just barely above average in this society if their IQs were on the same bell curve distribution as ours are.
Now try to imagine what a civilization where 1 out of 6 people was Nikola Tesla could invent.
So I used him specifically because he's an example of how different the world would be if we just solved problems in a different way. If we had gone with his technology instead of Edison's, the world that we know today wouldn't be the same. So the changes that occur over time, the butterfly effect that leads to, who knows what would happen if we had someone that could think differently. And that's when I get back to the megalithic structures. How could they have done that back then? We would struggle and maybe not even be able to do a lot of the structures that we see back then. Was there someone that was of a higher intelligence that was able to think in a different way to solve the problem of moving these giant stones, shaping them and putting them in place to where they're earthquake proof and all that good stuff? So was that handed down from a more advanced civilization to the locals, and they were kind of the workforce for it? The scoop marks that you see in a lot of these excavations, how in the world could they do the scoop marks to get these things where they were moved to? I mean, just moving these things was such an enormous task. And when I think of how hard it is to move something heavy, put your car in neutral and push it on a level surface, and then find a slight incline, and it's almost impossible to push it up that hill at that point. So if you're moving a 100-ton stone and there are any obstacles in your way, if you're not going downhill, it's going to be a monumental task. So why would they go to those extremes back then to do this? And in my opinion, it's because it was easier for them than it is for us. And how, I don't know, but I want to contribute it to intelligence of, or an understanding of how the world works that we don't currently recognize, or that we don't currently understand. And or maybe there's another ability that they had mentally that we don't, that's been deactivated on us, in us, because we lost our connection with our environment. I've said it in another recent interview. Whatever it is they had switched on in their mind, I want to figure out how to switch it on in mine. And I want you to be able to switch it on in yours as well, because that would be amazing to be able to change the way that you think in that extreme of a way. So I find that an interesting event, or a thing.
So is this all possible? I'm not a brain scientist or a rocket surgeon, so you're going to have to think for yourself.
So that's one of my favorite jokes, is I'm not a brain scientist or a rocket surgeon. Someone said that and I slapped my knee. I thought it was funny, so I had to include it in there. But that's my reaction video to my own video. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you watch it. I hope you share it and subscribe. I'm going to start trying to do this, if you guys respond positively to it, more often, and try to grow my YouTube channel with a little bit longer content. Thank you guys for watching.